dear Bill Gates, distinguished guests. It's so good to see you again, Bill, because the last time we met was just a month ago in New York at the Global Goalkeepers event. And I was very moved by your foundation's recognition of Europe's leadership on global health and the fight against the COVID-19. The award is truly a collective one. It belongs to all Europeans who showed such dedication during the pandemic, from the frontline workers in our hospitals and essential services to the scientists who developed the life-saving vaccines. And today we are joined by many of you here from around the world who are committed to global health and equity. So I would like to use this occasion to reflect on the experience of the pandemic, not from a medical point of view, but from the point of view as a policymaker. And I would like to give a sober assessment of what I think went well and where we need to do better in future. I have 6 lessons that we took. The first lesson, not surprisingly, is the utmost importance of solidarity and cooperation. And let me start with the European experience. When the COVID-19 virus made landfall in Europe, things got really tough at the beginning. Some member states chose to close their borders for life-saving material and equipment. There was painful competition for protective equipment, ventilators, and other medical supplies between the different member states. Vaccine nationalism became the norm around the world. And I can tell you, we Europeans had our tough and painful public discussions. But at a certain point, the European Union decided to take a different path. The path of solidarity and openness. We convinced member states not to close their borders, but to share equipment and personnel. We decided to buy vaccines together and not to compete with each other. We started the vaccination campaign on exact the same day in all our 27 member states. Yes, we started with low numbers, and that was heavily criticized, but we had a fair distribution. Disregard whether you are a large member state or a small one, a wealthy one or not so wealthy one. We decided not to close our borders for vaccine exports, but to introduce a transparency mechanism. And at this point, many, many thanks to your Prime Minister De Croo. If it weren't for you, you have been insisting on staying open for exports because you knew how important that is for the trust of the pharmaceutical industry in the location where they are. So today, over 80% of the European Union's adult population is fully vaccinated, while at the same time, we have exported 2/3 of the vaccines produced in Europe to the rest of the world. Solidarity and openness were the absolute preconditions to this success. My second lesson: science doesn't exist in a vacuum. I believe it was no coincidence that the safest and most effective vaccines were developed and rolled out rapidly in open societies. Science depends on cooperation. It depends on education, on the protection of property, intellectual property rights. Of course, on proper data sharing. But it also depends on individual mobility, for example, freedom to move. And of course, on the regulatory environment and on translating results into products, services, and policies. All these factors empower scientists to do their best work and enable society to reap the benefits. My colleagues and I benefited enormously from the collective wisdom of scientific advice. From you, Professor Peter Piot, You were my personal COVID advisor, outstanding, the way you gave me on a daily basis guidance and advice. From my group of COVID-19 advisors handpicked by you, Peter, and also from the platform we created of 27 member states' government advisors. So it is transparency and accountability, our freedom of speech, and the freedom of science that enable good policy making and innovation. And these are the values that democratic societies depend on and nurture. So it was democracies that developed the life-saving effective vaccines and that were best able to support their citizens when they needed our help the most. My third lesson is about the miracle of vaccines themselves. As a medical doctor by training, the importance of research and development is not news to me. But the pandemic made it very real for all of us. As you know, the outstanding mRNA vaccines did not come out of the blue. Their discovery, like all innovation, relies on long-term investment in scientists and their research. In fact, the European Commission had been investing in mRNA vaccine research since the early 2010s. However, in Europe, we did not have a BARDA, like in the United States, which prepares for the case of an emergency. And I must say this was an obvious disadvantage. So we learned it the rough way, and during the pandemic, we created HERA to anticipate threats and potential health crises. Now HERA works closely with our Horizon Europe program, the research program, to close the circle from blue sky discovery all the way to scaling up life-saving measures. Global cooperation in research and development is crucial for discovery. And that is why, for example, HERA and CEPI, Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, for example, have recently signed a letter of intent. They will cooperate on developing next-generation vaccines, including for COVID-19, as part of our Vaccines 2.0 strategy. Horizon Europe is providing, on a yearly basis, contributions of 35 million. And I'm very pleased that our clinical trials partnership for HIV, AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria between European and developing countries has recently agreed to co-run calls for proposals with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Which takes me to lesson 4, manufacturing capacity. Having safe and effective vaccines is not enough, we all know that. We needed badly the manufacturing capacity as well as open supply chains. And I vividly remember that at the height of the pandemic, we saw shortages of all kinds across the whole vaccine value chain, from bioreactor bags to vials, from lipids to even syringes. So we set up a task force to work with industry, with global partners, to remove these bottlenecks. This helped ramp up the monthly production capacity in the European Union from 20 million vaccines doses a month at the beginning of 2021 to around 300 million vaccine doses per month by the second half of the year. And having learned this lesson, we have now set up the EU FAB, which is an ever-warm network of production capacities to quickly ramp up vaccines production in the future. Ladies and gentlemen, so far, Europe has sent more than 2.5 billion COVID vaccine doses to 168 countries worldwide. And this is our 5th lesson. cooperation and solidarity must be global. At the start of the pandemic, there was no appropriate global framework to allow for fair sharing of vaccines and other medical countermeasures. So we helped set up the ACT Accelerator and COVAX, which we financed with 3 billion euros, and we donated 500 million vaccine doses to lower income countries. But clearly, this was not a sufficient approach. More had to be done and more can be done. And this is why we took a different approach now. We are supporting developing countries directly through financing, through regulatory capacity building and technology transfer to build up their own vaccine manufacturing capacity. We are working with Senegal, Rwanda, South Africa, and Ghana to produce mRNA vaccines that are made in Africa for Africans. And we are taking a similar approach now with Latin America. They've been asking us to do the same, and of course we responded positively, because this is the way to go. Regional resilience is the solution that builds global health resilience. And the sixth and final lesson concerns indeed the global health systems. Over the years, global health has been consistently underfunded and neglected. Not by the likes of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which is doing exemplary work, but by the governments. And the key is to be prepared, and this means keeping up the investment and keeping the focus in global health at all times, even now in these difficult times with completely different focus. So I am glad that we agreed finally to create a Pandemic Preparedness and Response Fund. The European Commission, together with the United States, have committed $450 million each, and this is just the start. With this reinforced funding, we will step up globally surveillance of cross-border health threats, the strengthening of health systems, and most importantly, the support in training and education. Ladies and gentlemen, I know we still have a long way to go, but thanks to all of you and your dedication to global health and equity, I believe we are on the right track. Next month, the European Commission will bring forward the EU Global Health Strategy. It's our proposal to the world on how to better work together in partnership to advance the common goal of global health. And of course, it will draw on the lessons I've just outlined to you. I look forward to continuing our work closely together with you, and I wish you a rewarding and thoughtful conference. Many thanks for your attention.